Hi, Marcus Brown.
Well, hello there.
Hello. So I know
Hello.
that you've played keys for many, many successful people, from the likes of S Club 7, I believe, through Celine Dion, Seal, Tina Turner, Madonna, and you've had a lot of wonderful opportunities in your career.
That's
So
very, very true.
I would love to know how you began as a keyboardist
Okay.
and how you developed your skills in the first place.
Right. Okay. That's a very good place to start. Well, I come from a long line of musicians, first and foremost. My father was a keyboard player. My grandfather was a trumpet player with the BBC Radio Orchestra. My great-grandfather was a piano player and accordion player. And my great-great-grandfather was a piano player for silent movies.
So music was definitely in your blood.
Yeah. And my mother's a dancer as well, so.
Oh, right. So rhythm is in your blood as well.
Yeah, I can count to 5. So yeah, that was the obviously a starting point, which then meant that there was always music in the house. There was always a piano there. There was always an organ in the house.
Okay, so how did you originally develop your skills? How did you start off? Because obviously as a keyboard player, that's slightly different to a pianist. That doesn't necessarily mean you began with a book and started with middle C.
Of course. Well, I mean, I did everything. I did all the classical stuff first.
Okay.
So by the time I was like 13 or 14, I'd done grade 8 and things like that. So
okay.
My chops were up to a skill. I had a lot of skill in that department.
So do you think that technical grounding was really important in your later development?
Yeah, I think it was. Because it's always there to fall back on at any given point. You can suddenly pull that out of the bag. If you haven't got that in the first place, you can't really pull it out of the bag.
Yeah.
All I had to do then was, well, shortly from sort of 13 to about 16, 17, I obviously got into jazz as well and wanted to learn how to improvise.
So
I went on a jazz course in Newcastle.
Okay.
And I came back after the first day and I was literally in tears. I mean, I think I was only 14, but I was literally in tears because it was the first time I'd seen a section on the music where there was just 8 bars and it just said improvise.
Right.
There was no music there.
No. So that was scary for you because you were up to then you were dependent on dots.
Yes. So that was an eye opener. And then I went home that night and said to my dad, "How do you improvise?" Which me and him always laughed about that for the rest of his life.
Right.
He said it was the strangest thing he'd ever had to try and explain to me. He said, "Look, I can't really tell you how to improvise. I can show you some starting points. I can give you a pentatonic scale. And show you that you can play this scale over this chord. Any of these notes will work. It's just what order you want to put them in and how long you want to make those notes. That's your choice."
Okay. That almost sounds like a Jamie Aebersold kind of approach.
It made real sense to me at that age, and God bless him, that was the best he could do. He was like, I can't really sit here and teach you. So that then led to I obviously got interested in synthesizers. That was the next big thing. It was like, right, okay, I've got to get myself a keyboard and I want to get into a band.
Okay.
So I had every magazine known to man with every keyboard in. And I mean, the bathroom was just full of them. Go to the bathroom, sit in the bath with, magazines about DX7s and Jupiter 8s and all kinds of things. and just dream about the day I could have one,
Right.
And again, my dad came through. There was a second-hand DX7. It was £1,000, which was a lot of money.
A lot of money, yeah.
A lot of money. And well, I remember we went through to see it, and he said, "Is that the one you want?" I went, "Yeah, that's the one I want." And it's really funny because I look back now, and I chose the most ridiculous keyboard in the world to learn how to program on, because the DX7 was not designed for anybody who didn't know a massive amount about synthesis.
Okay.
There was no knobs on it. It had 2 digits on it and then a load of push buttons that you had to try and work out what those parameters did.
Right.
I learned how to use the thing and I learned how to program it.
So there you were discovering attack of sounds, changing the timbre, the delay, the reverb, and your ear was fine tuning to the beginning of the note, the middle of the note, and the end of the note almost.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
The frequency that it was in, how round the sound is.
Yeah. The harmonics.
Looking at the waveforms, understanding waveforms,
sine waves, sawtooth, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then obviously once I got one keyboard, then it was, I think I got an electric piano after that. And
so
then,
did this start changing your playing? In other words, having been classically trained, is this at the point at which you're now thinking chords and chord progressions?
Well, I was still at that point. I still played a little bit like a piano player, but I would do that thing where I would play the piano, but then I would also have a couple of keyboards where I could play synth lines on.
Okay, so you were soloing out basically.
Yeah, but still I would have that, because it was early days of MIDI, I would have one keyboard MIDI to another, so I could have like a piano sound with strings underneath it.
Yes.
Back then, that's how you had to do it back then. You didn't have all those sounds in one keyboard.
Yes.
You had to chain them all together to do things.
Yes.
But it wasn't until I got to a recording studio and with a producer for the first time in my life, that I realized that I didn't have to play with both hands all the time on that particular part. It suddenly became apparent to me at that point that playing full-handed a piano part on a track
was that you learning to team play in a band sense, as in other players have got the bass, other players are filling the sound out, and your
register.
Yeah, and then when you found your register, then did it become more about melody then than chord progressions?
Certainly. It's not just about playing those chords on that beat.
Yeah,
it's then about finding a way to make something melodic around those chord changes. That's less harmonically clustered, if that makes any sense.
Yes, so it sounds like a horizontal line rather than a note from this chord and a note from that chord.
Yes, all these horizontal lines going like that suddenly provide this melange of harmony, you know.
So you were learning that harmonies and chords can be implied rather than just played. Yeah,
and that still goes on to this day. I mean, I'm currently doing a lot of orchestral string arranging, and I'm just finding every day more and more tonalities and more instances that you can add very, very subtle harmony. And it doesn't necessarily become a triad. It's something else. There's just flavor. It's harmonic flavor, not necessarily strict harmony.
So how for you did you get these phrases and these melodies out? Do you naturally hear them in your head? Was it something? Yes. Is it something you have to, in your practicing, how do you practice it? Do you loop a progression and try out a million different things? Do you start on different notes of the chords? How do you practice developing melodies? Do you practice developing melodies, or does it just come to you?
No. There's two ways to approach it, I find. I find the better ones that I've done, it's when I've been standing, listening to the track, and I've heard the melody, or I've heard a sound in my head, and I can hear clearly those notes, and then I'll go to the keyboard, find those notes, and then perform the part in.
Okay.
As opposed to the other way, which is then sitting at the keyboard and playing till you find something.
Yes. So your ear, your listening skills are latching onto something that catches your attention, but by the sounds of what you've just said, you don't have perfect pitch. So you then have to find the notes. You probably have relative pitch, do you?
I'm more. I mean, if I know what key the song's in, then I'm going to know what notes I'm singing.
Yeah. So it's relative pitch. So if you know where you know where the tonic is, you know where the root is.
If I concentrate really hard on an E chord, I can't find my perfect pitch. But I wouldn't say it comes straight off the bat. But,
no. So you latch onto something and then you and then you develop it.
Yeah. Also, the other way that I find, if I don't hear it in my head, I would say sometimes 40-50% of the time, it's something that I walk around and while the song's playing, while I'm in the studio, it'll be something I'm singing.
Right. Okay.
So it's a physical sound coming out of me, That
Yes.
I'll either sing it in the sound that I want, or the instrument, or evoke that thing, and then
Right.
that'll lead me.
I'm really interested in this because one of the things I teach a lot of is the idea of the inner ear, and I actually try and train people to hear things better in their head. And when I have pianists improvising, I talk about singing it so that so that you don't default to the same finger patterns all the time that you practiced,
That's
because
true.
your voice leads you somewhere else. Otherwise, sometimes your fingers just return to the same things.
Yeah, exactly.
So, do you have a crystal clear idea in your head of what's going on then? Do you hear tunes in your head? Do you train your mind before you play?
Right. I would be really honest with you now and say that my focus now is more on composition and more on studying the art of that harmony and those extra outer harmony things that I was talking about before.
Okay.
So my at this point in my life, my things that I derive pleasure from are not necessarily playing.
Okay. So when you were playing though,
right.
Were you actively training your mind and training yourself to hear things in your head, or were
Yes.
you just hearing things in your head?
I wasn't training, I was just hearing things.
You
So
were.
I've always had an ability to maybe just listen to something and go, right, okay, I've got that.
Yes, and you can hear it, and then you work out reproducing it. And so when you sing, do you think that's more creative than when your fingers produce it?
Usually.
Yeah.
Usually. I think so. But again, when you're talking about work with electronic keyboards and synthesizers and stuff like that, there is a third parameter to this as well, which is the random factor. And that is that you pull up a sound that's close to what you want, what you think you're hearing, and then you might lean on a thing on the front panel of the synth, or pull a patch cable out or something, and then suddenly it goes haywire and you're off down a completely different territory, but it takes you somewhere, and it leads you, and you follow it and you go with it. And it's either again, like the other two methods, it's either going to be brilliant or it's going to be terrible. It's one or the other.
Okay, and so that random element is important for spontaneous creativity.
I think so. Sometimes I think certainly with composition, and in this world where we want to keep moving forward all the time, I think a little bit of being able to play something on a keyboard and it gives you a mood or evokes an emotion. I don't think there's anything wrong with that as a starting point.
No, and I certainly, when I was a teenager and I had a little Yamaha keyboard, and when I changed from flute to string sounds, I found my mind in a completely different zone.
Yeah, of course.
A different emotion, without a doubt.
Every sound brings out a different emotion.
Yeah. Interestingly, I've been made aware of an American woman recently who has a whole series of books out about unlocking creativity. And one of the things she suggests, which translated into our language, would literally be sit at the piano for at least 7 minutes, don't deliberately play a chord or anything, and just play, make it sound totally awful at the beginning, and see where it leads you. Which is a fascinating creative perspective to try and get you out of your, pre-known patterns, and to take you into a completely different area.
I had an interesting thing yesterday. I just got a job that came through, and I needed to write an overture for it. And I was nowhere near a keyboard, and I was having issues with my computer system yesterday, so it was getting some repairs done. And I couldn't find any manuscript paper anywhere. And for the life of me, I couldn't be bothered to sit there with a ruler and draw 5 lines, just so I could write at least the melody down.
Yeah.
So what I did was I just wrote the notes, the duration of the notes, that I was hearing this melody in my head. And I thought, surely, if I write all of these notes down, and it was a good 16, 32 bars, the melody. I thought, if I write all these notes down and I loosely go up and down where the pitch is,
yes,
I might remember this tomorrow.
Yes, as a graphic score.
As a graphic score.
Yeah.
And you know what? I came in this morning and I put the piece of paper in front of the piano and I played it first time.
Well done. Great job. I used to use a dictaphone, actually. I used to lie in bed and sing into a dictaphone.
Same here, but I couldn't find anything yesterday. I was having a right palaver with it. And I didn't want to lose it. I didn't want to lose it at that point because I knew it was good.
Yeah.
And subsequently, within 2 hours this morning, I'd finished a piece of music based on the fact that the melody was all clear and came from my head. then the basic harmony structure was there, and
So-
I knew nothing would clash.
Right. So we've talked about melody. We've talked about that you latch onto something, that you create something in your mind, that you then find it on the keyboard, and that different tones may send you into a different direction, different timbres, different sounds, and that's how you become. That's your way of melodic creativity. So we've avoided chord progressions. Are they important? Are they important?
Is something to understand and learn.
Was there a stage, having come from a classical piano route to going to your day of jazz when you came back really upset, to you're getting synths and you're interested in bands and you're interested in different sounds?
Right.
And
well, it comes from the
talk
back,
about melodies, but
comes from the back of the jazz thing.
Mhm.
So in coupling the jazz with my classical skills, by the time I was sort of 21, I had the full knowledge of augmented jazz harmony as well.
yes,
So
yes,
30 sharpened 11ths and all that kind of thing.
yes,
So my technicality had increased even more. So
yes,
when then confronted with getting into sessions and things like that, it was a big shock to realize that most of that didn't really come in handy at all on the types of records and the type of music that I became involved in.
yes.
However, it's like I said at the beginning, it's really, really handy to have it because you never know when it's going to be needed.
So do you have a set, a number of set progressions that are like your default vocabulary that you return to?
I would say there's certain inversions and things that I like.
Yeah.
Or voicings, I would say. There's
Yes,
voicings
yes.
with certain chords.
Well, of
that
course, that really comes from the jazz world, doesn't it? Voicings.
Yeah, but it's learning then to take them into a pop world. Certainly apply them back to maybe playing piano on a pop track on today's music.
Okay, so how much does guitar influence you on that? So, for instance, you've got power chords on the guitar, for instance. So that's the type of voicing, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
How much does guitar influence the way you play? Is that connected, or is that not relevant?
No, it is actually, because well, a lot of my early work I did was with a friend who I still work together, and he's a guitarist. Now, he never read any music and didn't, he couldn't tell you where C is.
No, so he's the Paul McCartney of the world.
Yeah, but together it worked out fine between the two of us, because he would play things, have no idea what he was playing, and then I'd be going, right, okay, show me what that voicing is, let me work that out, and I'd translate that to the piano, and I'd be like, oh, that's a really nice voicing for that chord. Yes. I wouldn't normally play those notes in that order.
Yes.
And so I learned a lot from that.
Okay, so voicings are important.
Yeah.
And we talked about melody, we've talked about progressions, and we've talked about voicings. Now, rhythm.
Sorry, just to finish one more thing with voicings there. From a keyboard player's perspective as well, I think you've got to understand that playing voicings on a piano and being a keyboard player is very, very different. In fact, completely different from playing voicings on a Hammond organ and being a Hammond player.
Okay.
So
because
you can still be
the fluty sound, for instance, is thicker, isn't it?
The technique's completely different as well.
Okay.
The technique, how you operate a Hammond, what you get out of a Hammond as a keyboard player is completely different from how you use your hands on a piano.
Right.
So they're almost like two separate instruments, and you would treat a synth as a third instrument.
Yes. So on the Hammond, do you find there's a greater distance between the bass and the chord?
No. Because if I'm playing Hammond in a pop context or a blues context where that instrument is really being so prevalent, you tend to only really use one manual at a time.
Yeah.
And play with one hand, and occasionally use your other hand for other tricks.
Yes, because other people have got those registers.
Other people are taking care of those registers, exactly.
Yeah.
So that instrument's been adapted in that context with a Leslie speaker to fit in to do that job, to fill that certain frequency.
Yes, yes.
So you couldn't really play it like as if you were playing it like a church organ. It would just sound ridiculous. It wouldn't fit.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we ought to talk about rhythm. So you've already mentioned your mum being a dancer, but when you're playing with a band, obviously rhythm largely comes from the kit.
Yes.
So does that mean your melodies and chords are locking in with what you're hearing from the kit?
Yes, very much so. Prior to the age of clicks and stuff like that, which I've spent probably 35, more than 35 years, I've been working with a click in one ear.
Yeah.
So prior to that, yes. I mean, if you're a bass player, you watch the kick drum, watch the, you're locking into that.
Yes.
You're moving with, and it's like a thing that passes on. So if the bass player's watching the kick drum and he's locked in, then that means the keyboard player is now listening to a locked bass with a locked bass drum. So you just lock into that, and then it's like a bit of Lego,
Yes.
It all locks together, but it has to have some substance on the bottom. Somebody has to be right somewhere. But I think the one thing that I've learned over the years, and the one thing that I found that has become really important for me, and something that I'm really adamant about, probably more so than anything else, is being in time and playing in the pocket, playing in the groove.
Yeah.
But I think, going back to what I said, because I've had a click in my ear for 35 years, my timing is impeccable.
Right.
And I pride myself in that.
Yes.
And all the people that I've worked with, in the same field, that's why we're there doing that job, because it is spot on the money every night.
Right.
You can't mess with the click. So I recommend, anybody. It's even when I was a kid, I still played with a metronome every day for at least.
Right. Okay. That's really important. It was interesting. I saw a clip of a George Michael rehearsal once, in which George Michael actually said, "I think this is one click too slow."
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was interesting how precise he was.
No, I mean, I've been on sessions before where we've argued about 0.5 of a BPM.
Yeah. Right.
And it's made a difference. It's made a difference. And we've gone, okay, yeah, that's better at 0.5 down.
Okay. Okay,
So
that's really good.
important.
So
very, very
if you're comping or whatever, are you mainly listening then to the bass and snare? Where's your ear being dragged?
If I'm comping as in
if you're playing in a band and you're filling out and you're not soloing,
right,
but you're filling in, what are you listening for in particular in the kit to lock into and to be?
It's going to be the kick and the bass for me.
Yeah.
It's going to be that, and the backbeat as well. So I mean, I need that. You've got to have you're going to have the ones and threes. You need the twos and the fours as well.
Yeah.
But I think just again, I've been blessed with good monitoring. My hearings, I had it tested again a few months ago, and that's because I've used the monitoring all of my life.
Right.
I was very, very lucky to get started at an age where I'd probably by my mid-20s, I never stood in front of another speaker again. Right. So I've been very, 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 very lucky like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about preparing for a big gig or a big event. I think a really interesting thing is to talk to people about if you've got a massive event or you've got a recording with a significant artist. What's your approach to preparation?
Well, know what you're getting involved in first. I think that's always a good one. Again, I think I've been pretty lucky that the reason why I'm usually find myself in session situations or in these kind of situations is because people know that I'm good at fixing what they've asked me to come and do. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
if you've been given a song and let's say it's a new song, so you don't know it, it's new to you. What's the process for you?
Right. Okay. Well, I'll take you through a session. I did one a few years back. I was in London anyhow, playing with Madonna at Hyde Park. We had a gig that day. But a friend of mine, actually from up here, Steve Robson, who's a very well-known producer in England, was producing James Morrison.
Okay.
And he rang me up in the morning. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm in a hotel and I'm playing this afternoon at Hyde Park." He said, "Well, have you got an hour or so spare? I'm just around the corner in the studio. I've got this new artist. It was James's first album. I'd love you to come and play the piano." So literally half an hour later, I'm in a taxi going to the studio, and the piano's already mic'd. They know I'm coming. So you walk in, it's like, "Hello, how you doing? Nice to meet everybody." And then it's just a case of, right, give me some paper. So get some paper. There's no charts. Nobody writes charts out for pop sessions. So I'm like, "Okay, can you, I think there was a guide piano on the song."
Right.
Somebody obviously put a guide piano on it. So, right, okay, the engineer will normally ask you, "How do you want to hear the song?" So my preference is, if I'm playing bass or if I'm playing piano, I don't want to hear the guide. I don't want to hear what anybody else has played. So I'll get them to turn that off, and then I'll ask them to play the track from the beginning.
Okay.
And then it's pen and paper in hand. Ask them what key it's in.
Yeah.
And then it's pen and paper in hand, and write out a chart as it's going. And I mean, a lot of people will give you a couple of times to write a chart out, but you know, I've been on sessions before where people expect you to hear it once, and then they go, "Right, okay, can you go and get on with it now?" So it can be that quick, the turnaround.
Right.
And then I went next door. I did 2 takes, of which Steve preferred the second one. And then there was an 8-bar intro, and Steve then got me to play the intro about 50 times because every time I played it, he was like, "Nah, not that one. Try it again."
Did you find you were losing your spontaneity?
Well, at that point, yes. Then you start going, right, okay, what is it you want? Because we were talking about the difference between one note and the other note, like a minuscule amount. Yeah. But he was right to do it. I mean, we had a laugh doing it. But there's the funny thing. I played the entire track in 1 take, but then spent half an hour trying to sort the first 4 bars out.
Yeah, yeah.
So it can be very strange, you know. But in terms of what preparation, it's really just putting all of those things that you've practiced and relied and worked so hard to learn, putting them all into a little basket and having them there in front of you, ready, that you can pull out at any point. That's
okay. You've just used a bombshell word, and that's practice. So what's practice mean for you? As in, this is a word that people flash around, and actually, I think different people practice in different ways.
Yes. Yeah. I like I said now, I don't tend to do a lot of work or where I need to be playing with extreme skill, right?
Okay.
I mean, like pristine. I don't need to be doing that. I don't particularly play music like that anymore. I'm a little bit older now.
Okay, so it's not about technical genius.
No, because I've kind of done that. So now I'm just more interested in finding the right notes and playing those notes and enjoying those notes.
Okay, so
but being consistent with that as well.
So consistency is important.
Having your arsenal, having an arsenal of things.
Or a toolkit.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I can still play all the fast stuff if I need to. It's just that's not really. I don't need to sit and do that every day because it's not something on my agenda.
Okay, this could be interesting. Are we talking then more about musicianship and expression than we are about technique?
Yes, yes.
So I mean, how do you practice and develop expression and musicianship?
That's a tough one, really. I mean, you have to play with other people, I suppose. Because, again, there's been very few occasions in my life. Okay, I'll go back to the James Morrison track again, because it's a prime example. If anybody wants to listen to that track, it's called Undiscovered.
Okay.
For a long time in the UK. So it was great. But if you haven't listened to it, it's just great songwriting. The production's fantastic because it's so laid back. And there is one place in that song, and it's the entrance to the very, very last chorus, where I do a piano run, which runs over 2 bars and goes from one end of the piano all the way up to the top. It's a double-handed thing. It's an old, like one of these kind of techniques, you know. Just that kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, but, I call it the puppet technique. With one hand on the other.
Yeah, but I did it on that first take, and that's on the record. It stayed on.
Great.
And it was funny because I hadn't heard it for so long, the track, and it came on the radio the other day. And I was sitting with my wife, and I said, "Oh yeah, I played on this." And it got to that bit, and I was quite sort of taken back. I was like, "Oh, that was some nice playing there, nice little flurry on the piano." But in the pop context, that is really the only time you'd get to do it. You get one little pop in the song.
You'll get a 2-bar solo.
Yeah, that was it. That was it.
So do you ever find you have to work on creativity? So we're talking about musicianship, we're talking about expression as part of your practice. And I think as part of that, we need to mention imagination then. Because so what you're saying is, when I heard that, that seemed really imaginative at that moment.
Yeah. Seems like the right thing to do as well. You know, you get that feeling. You're like, I know exactly what I'm going to do here.
So do you practice being more imaginative or more expressive?
Well, that's interesting because again, in that world, I tend to find that I'm becoming more expressive and more creative with the composition. Again, it's hard for me to sort of to get my head around that as a question.
So I think what I'm trying to get at is to take it a bit further. Is practicing involves a certain amount of repetition, as in if you don't get something right, you need to go over it. But repeating something 100 times is not necessarily good practice technique. So it may take, 3 or 4 times to pretty much get the notes there, and maybe a couple of times to tighten the rhythm. So what is it you're thinking? What's in your brain beyond the notes and rhythms? What is it in your brain when you're practicing? What is it you're trying to achieve? What is it you're doing rather than just robotic, I think is the word I'm looking for, rather than robotic repetition?
Trying to make it feel fluid, that's for one. I like it when I like it when I can look at my hand and it doesn't look like it's about to fall off.
Okay.
It looks like it's doing it naturally.
Okay.
Because
so a relaxed technique, yes.
I'm like I said, I'm a little older now, and I'm certainly my right hand technique is nowhere near what it was 10 years ago. And my left hand is definitely not like what it was 20, 30 years ago. But that's because I spend so much time with basically one hand on the keyboard and one hand on a mouse now.
Yeah.
I don't tend to spend much time using both hands. Although, like I said, with this composing thing that I'm really, really chucking myself back into, I got my 88 keyboard out of the cupboard the other day. I thought, yes, I'll have to have that there.
Okay.
Because again, when writing for orchestra, one needs to be able to see the bottom of the orchestra and the top of the orchestra.
Okay, the final thing I think I'd like to ask you is about preparing for a big event mentally. And maybe there've been times in your career where you've had anxiety, maybe, or have you had anxiety? Do you get it? Do you get nervous? Yeah. Or is it a case of, I know I've prepared well, so therefore I'm fine?
I always get nervous. And I think once I've had a few really, really big things under my belt that had happened, I realized then that it was perfectly normal. And from that point on, then I never squashed it. It was just like, no, I'll pace the floor before a gig. I will, if I'm in the dressing room, backwards and forwards to the bathroom. Just want to get on, want to get it going.
So have you ever found that's affected your muscles? So maybe your hand tightens and your fingers aren't moving as they should. Has it affected you physically, or? I
did have one episode once in Earl's Court in London at a Madonna gig, and I had to get some acupuncture because my hand just completely seized up.
Yeah.
And he said that was just stress, but it was quite a stressful time.
Have you found any particular ways to manage your mindset to keep it healthy when you're feeling pressured?
Do you know what? I think the best thing for anybody in those circumstances is rest. And I'm a big supporter of, especially if you're touring, if you're a touring musician.
Yep.
And you've got a day off, or you've got some time during the day, even if it's a gig day and you've got some time during that day, use the time relaxing, getting some rest, because it's the gigging and the traveling that will wear you down.
Right.
And if you party too hard and don't take care of yourself on your days off, it'll fry you. That's my only piece of advice on that one.
So, Marcus Brown, I would like to thank you for this interview and telling us to take care of ourselves, looking after our own welfare, so that when it comes to the big day, we deliver our best.
And the best of luck to all of you out there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
for having me.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.